So in the eyes of the law, is throwing a rock the same thing as breaking a window? I mean, the action's the same, right? But the outcome is what really matters. Today we're going to dig into result crimes, a legal concept that really proves it's not just what you do, but what happens because of what you did.
Okay, let's picture this. Someone throws a rock into a totally empty field. No harm, no foul, right? Now imagine that exact same person, with the same rock and the same throw, but this time it shatters a priceless stained glass window.
You see? It's the same act, but the consequences are just worlds apart. This whole puzzle is exactly what the concept of result crimes is designed to solve. So how on earth does the law tell the difference between an innocent act and a criminal one?
All right, to really get a handle on result crimes, we actually need to start by looking at what they're not. You see, the law draws this really crucial line in the sand, separating the act itself from the result of that act.
And this is that line. On one side, we have what are called conduct crimes. Here, just doing the action is illegal. You can think of it as crossing a forbidden line. But on the other side, we have result crimes, where it's the consequence of your action that actually matters. It's not about the step you take, it's about where you land.
Let's just zoom in on conduct crimes for a second. A perfect example is driving without a license. I mean, you could have a totally safe trip, obey every single traffic law, and not harm a soul. But it doesn't matter. The act of driving unlicensed is the entire offense. No bad result needed.
Okay, so now let's get to the main event, result crimes. This is where the consequences of what someone does really take center stage and become the very heart of the crime itself.
Now, the most important word here, you got to remember, is cause. For a result crime to even exist, an unlawful act has to directly lead to a specific forbidden outcome. If that prohibited result doesn't happen, then legally speaking, the crime just hasn't been completed.
And you know, these crimes are probably more familiar than you think. For an act to be considered murder, a person has to die. For something to be criminal damage, property has to be damaged. You see, the result isn't just some afterthought. It's a required ingredient for every single one of these offenses.
So, ultimately, it all comes down to this. The action might start the story, but it's the illegal result that writes the final chapter. That consequence is a core, completely non-negotiable part of the offense.
But here's the thing. If the result is so essential, prosecutors have a huge challenge on their hands. They have to prove the defendant's act actually caused it. They have to forge what the law calls an unbreakable chain of causation.
And this quote right here, it gets right to the heart of that legal hurdle. It's not enough to just say, well, this person acted badly and then a bad thing happened. No. The prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's conduct was the direct cause of that prohibited result.
So how did they build that chain? Well, the law uses a two-step test. First up is factual causation, which is often called the but-for test. You just ask, but for the defendant's action, would the result have happened anyway? If the answer is no, then you've got factual causation. But, and this is a big but, that's not enough.
You also need what's called legal causation. See, the defendant's action can't just be a tiny, minor part of the story. It has to be a significant, a substantial cause of the final outcome. Just being a trivial contribution isn't going to be enough to establish legal guilt.
So, what happens when some new event, something completely unexpected, shows up between that initial act and the final result? Can this new twist actually break the chain of causation and let the original person off the hook?
This is where things get really interesting. I mean, think about it. If you start a domino rally, are you responsible for absolutely everything that falls, no matter how wild or bizarre the chain reaction gets?
So the law has a fancy Latin name for a chain-breaking event, novus actus interveniens, which basically just means a new intervening act. This could be some unforeseeable action by a third party, a truly independent choice made by the victim themselves, or even a completely random natural event, like, say, the victim getting struck by lightning.
However, and this is a big one, there is a really powerful exception to this whole chain-breaking idea, and it's known as the thin skull rule. This principle basically says that a victim's pre-existing vulnerability, whether it's physical or psychological, does not count as a new intervening act.
And the legal principle here is pretty simple and stark. You have to take your victim as you find them. What this means is, if your victim has, say, an unusually fragile skull, and a minor push leads to a fatal injury, you are still responsible for their death. Their vulnerability doesn't break the chain.
And so we leave you with this final thought. Result crimes force us to draw a line between an action and its consequences. But that thin skull rule, Well, it pushes that line into some really uncomfortable territory, asking a question that goes way beyond the courtroom. Just how far should our responsibility for our own actions truly extend?